This is the last week of our series, Open. And we've been talking about an openness to life, to seeing life as an adventure, to being able to say yes to life. And there are lots of things that would tempt us to be closed to life. Am I right about that, correct? A lot of things that would say, don't be vulnerable. Don't choose to join in community with other people. Stay away from, go it alone. Don't be open to new ideas and new possibilities. No, just make up your mind, keep it closed. This Facebook culture we're in, where everybody just argues all the time. And so we're talking about, though, living for something bigger than ourselves and being open to new information and being willing to join together with a group of people to do some things in life that matter together. Now, that could be worldwide on a global scale, attacking poverty. It could be in your own family. It could be in a sibling rivalry, right? It could be with coworkers, right? Living with openness and a sense of what could be and possibility and vulnerability is really a key to happiness in life. And as I think about what could tempt us to be closed and challenges we face, I have my little bracelet on here, my Prayers for Presley bracelet, and we have more of these available at the back. Presley is an 8-month-old little girl here in our church who's battling an aggressive form of cancer. And these bracelets are a $5 donation. This goes straight into a fund for her and her family. Last week, her mom, Liz, was here with the kids and didn't really get to call them out, but I see Lori here today. And so Lori is Presley's mom. Could we welcome Lori and just kind of show our love for their family? And you guys have, your schedule's been completely dominated by this, and you spent a lot of time at the hospital. It's good to see you. And you'll get a lot of hugs after the service, I bet. But you can pick up your Prayers for Presley bracelet after the service. So how open are you as a person? If we did a scale 1 to 10, right? Like, what would your answer be? Does your first answer tend to be yes or no? Are you more open or are you closed? John Lennon said that when he met Yoko Ono, he walked into this art exhibit that she had created, and there was a ladder. And he climbed the ladder, and there was a magnifying glass hanging from the ceiling. Who knows this story? And so, like, he picks up the magnifying glass, and he looked at a word on the ceiling, and what was the word? Remember? Yes, the word yes. He said he fell in love, right? Does your answer tend to be yes? That's like a really emotional, artsy person, isn't it? You fall in love over the word yes, right? Like, does your answer tend to be yes or no to life, to new things? There are lots of things that would tempt us to say no. Our wonderful local cable company decided recently, and you sense the sarcasm there, right? Decided to go all digital, which is fine. And that meant that I lost cable news channels that I used to have. And I thought about like ordering them in the digital format, and like, wait a second, there's an opportunity here. So I haven't had cable news in like 3 weeks. I feel this strange emotion, I think it's called happiness, from not watching these cable news shows all the time. I mean, they're, culture-wide, right? Like in our media, it just seems like we live in this time, holy moly, right? Where it's so divided and contentious and argumentative, and then you get on social media and you just want to look at pictures of cats, but then, the Facebook bombs are lobbed back and forth, and we live in a time that is as polarized, as divided as we've ever been. We live in a time, for example, where we have like the Black Lives Matter movement that I sympathize with in many ways, and then there's like the counterpart now, where like Blue Lives Matter. It's like we have to pick between, do you want justice for African Americans or do you love cops? I don't want to pick between those two things. Both of those things are important. It's a disaster for America to have to pick between those two things. But there's this polarizing, this pull, right, to be pulled apart. Are you with me? Do you feel that? It's just this separation force almost like in our country, polarizing people. And then you can turn the TV off. You can have family disagreements. You can feel this separation in church. You can feel it over theological differences with your family. You can feel it at Thanksgiving dinner. You can feel it on date night. You can feel it at work. There's so many things that tempt us to pull back, be closed, be separate, be the opposite of open. It's hard in our culture to say things like, I don't know, or, I see your point there. It's hard. It seems like it's hard to say that, isn't it? Or agree to disagree. It seems like it's just hard to say things like that. In fact, there's something about the human brain. We're actually wired in this way that causes us to be angry at things we don't fully understand. We tend to be down on what we're not up on. If there's something where there's a gap in the information, this is science. Because science, we tend to fill in that gap with something negative, and then we get angry. It's this weird thing. And so that's affected our social media, interaction online, the comments section online, of course. Like, if we don't understand somebody or something fully, we tend to get angry at it. Or actually angry at that person. We personalize it even. We get angry at a person if we don't understand things. I went to a media training seminar recently with a former TV news anchor. And she said, if a reporter interviews you and they ask you a question, what is the worst thing you could ever say to a reporter? Say it with me. No comment. It's the worst thing you could ever say, because as soon as they say, I approached so-and-so and they had no comment, how does that play to the viewer? This thing in our brains kicks in, oh, they're hiding something, right? We just fill it in with something negative, and then we get angry at that person. If we don't know something, we'll just make stuff up, and then we'll get angry at it. That's how social media works as well. There was an article called The Science of Why the Comment Section is So Awful from April 2015 by Phoebe Gabin. She said, unfortunately, one of the side effects of anger is that it makes you dumb. No, really, it does. Angry people tend to rely on cognitive shortcuts, easy rules of thumb, rather than on more systematic reasoning. They're also quick to blame individuals rather than the aspects of a situation for problems. When we don't understand something, again, we get mad at it, and then we actually personalize it and start attacking somebody else, or we just assume the worst. 5 or 6 years ago, I lived back in Ohio. It was before we moved here. And I was serving in a church in a town called Gehenna. And if you know anything about the Bible or Greek, the word for hell in the New Testament is Gehenna. So it's 2 letters off of hell in the Bible, but it's actually a beautiful little town with awesome people. It's the only town in America where it's funny to talk about hell, though, I discovered. But great people. And so just a few miles down the road, there's another town called New Albany, and they kind of run together. You don't know where one stops and the other starts. And there was this guy who was a part of our church who lived in New Albany. He had a daughter who was in junior high, and she was going to this junior high ministry at this church in New Albany. And he just told me one day, he's like, man, like this junior high ministry is absolutely amazing. He's like, there are all kinds of junior high kids there. It's just like a rock show. He's like, they have this incredible band that plays there on a regular basis. Like super good. And when you hear somebody say this incredible, I found this new incredible band, man, like, right? Oh, sure, buddy. Like, like your inner hipster kicks in, and you're like, sure, whatever. And so he's like, man, this band is amazing. Like, the kids love it, the adults love it. And I'm like, okay, that's cool, man. I'm like, so what's the name of the band? He goes, 21 Pilots. That's before anybody knew who they were. 5 miles down the road. I didn't say this out loud. This is what I thought. Absolutely true story. I'm like, that's a stupid name for a band. And then in my mind, I kid you not, in my mind I'm thinking, why isn't there any good music anymore? They come up with dumb band names like 21 Pilots and just bad music. Probably some kids messing around. And now, like, they were in Phoenix, I heard the cheap seats were like $100 or something. Like, oh, 21 Pilots was 5 miles down the road, and they blew up right before we moved here to start this church. And I'm like dissing 21 Pilots, not knowing who they would become, right? When we don't understand something, I'm like, I could have known those guys, or, if we don't understand something, we tend to just read negative things into it. So Open is based on this kind of highlight study of the book of Acts, the Acts of the Apostles, the 5th book of the New Testament. It's what the first followers of Jesus did after his life on earth. And so we've been reading through that together, and the book of Acts starts with the Apostle Peter, St. Peter being the leader of the church. And then around chapter 9, we read about the conversion of Paul, or Saul as he was called. And then after that, the book of Acts kind of changed narratives, and it really is centered around Paul as the leader of this new thing that's being called Christianity. And so Paul has this conversion in Acts chapter 9. He's a zealous religious man who actually persecutes Christians. He's in Israel on the way to Damascus, Syria. And while he's on the road, he has this visionary experience. A light from heaven flashes. It knocks him on the ground. He's blinded, but he hears a voice. He interprets as the voice of Jesus saying, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" And so Paul has this dramatic conversion, this 180 flip. He's pretty open. He has this 180 flip, and he becomes the most effective evangelist for anything in the history of the world. He essentially starts what is now Christianity. And so some scholars have said it's not too far off. You could call it Paulianity. He's been so massively influential. And then in Acts chapter 17, Paul, he travels around the Middle East and Europe, starting these new little churches, and he'll start one for a couple of years and go to the next place, start another one, he'll write letters back to them. Those letters are half of our New Testament. But as he's traveling, he stops in Athens, Greece. And the cradle of Western civilization, philosophy, and the university and knowledge. And so he has this discussion in Acts 17 with people he disagrees with and people who disagree with him. Actually, two discussions. One is in the marketplace called the Agora, and the other is a debate location called the Areopagus, or Areopagus. And so we can see this discussion and how it played out between the Apostle Paul and his hearers who had very different ideas about God. And in this conversation, Paul takes the Jewish concept of God, which is his tradition, and he tries to build a bridge with Gentiles, non-Jews, Greeks, and their view of God. And so we have this just absolutely fascinating dialogue between the Apostle Paul and the people of Athens. And so I'm going to read several verses. It's an interesting story, though, and so you can just follow along on the screen. This is Acts chapter 17, verses 16 through 34. And we're going to see some things about openness and discussions and divisiveness and building bridges that we could all benefit from. So verse 16, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. These are kind of statues and monuments to gods. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace, the Agora, day by day with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, a little bit of name call, a little bit of Facebook there in that sentence. Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Then they took him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, where they said to him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? You're bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean." All the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking and listening to the latest ideas. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I can see in every way that you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, and this is what I'm going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands, these idols, these statues. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. And God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. Speaking about the resurrection of Jesus, of course, when they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered, but others said, we want to hear you again on this subject. At that, Paul left the council. Some of the people became followers of Paul and believed. Among them was Dionysius a member of the Areopagus, also a woman named Damaris, and a number of others. So we have words like ignorance and things like that. While that wouldn't necessarily fly in our American parlance, the language used here, written by the author of Acts, pretty much makes Paul a Socrates figure. Again, this is Athens, Greece. And this is language that was used of a respectful philosophical debate. So the original readers of Acts, who aren't us, they're people who lived on the other side of the world 2,000 years ago, would have read this and thought, oh, they're having a philosophical, intellectual discussion for the mutual benefit of each other. That's how this reads in an ancient Greek context. This is like a debate, followers of Socrates and followers of Aristotle, and we're discussing ideas here. That's how that would have read. Now, the Epicureans were critical of idols. Remember, they were Epicurean philosophers. They didn't like the statues and the stone temples to the gods. They didn't believe that sacrificing to these impersonal deities actually accomplished anything. The Stoics, another group there, were rationalists, but they believed in a divine force that animated the universe, and they wanted to live in harmony with the universe, and they believed in a divine being that permeated the universe, pretty much Jedi, the Stoics. Way funnier in my head than it was out loud, so we'll make a note of that for next time. And so Paul is talking with these groups of people. We know something about them. We know where they were coming from. And we see that Paul, he has strong opinions. And at the same time, he's trying to build a bridge with these people who see things differently than he does, but that also share a lot of things in common with him. And so the book of Acts, again, presents this as an intellectual discussion, a civil discussion, a respectful discussion for the mutual benefit of all the people discussing it, just like Facebook, right? And so, but it's presented as something good and respectful. Now, it does go a little bit down the Facebook route in the Agora when some people accuse Paul of being a babbler. Remember, what is this babbler saying? That's English, of course. The Greek word used there is a little more colorful. All the kids are jumping on the trampoline, so we're all mature adults here, right? No, you're not very confident about that. But the Greek word for babbler is spermologos, sperm picker. That's what they call Paul. What is this sperm picker saying? That does sound like it could be on Facebook, doesn't it? What is this? Or seed picker. Seed picker. It was just a pejorative in this time, meaning somebody who would go along and like picking up seeds on the ground, and they would pick up scraps of knowledge without understanding the whole system. Amateurs, right? And so they think, oh, he's just somebody he's tossing out a little philosophy, but he doesn't really understand it. He's just trying to make himself look good. So there is a little bit of name calling at the Agora, but then they move on to the Areopagus, and the name calling stops. Now, there was some sneering at the end, but there was no name calling. In fact, they wanted to hear more about what he had to say. They were open. They were open to new ideas, these people at the Areopagus. And then Paul, while yes, it's Paul, and he has a strong personality and his reputation, if you've been around church, right? And there's, ignorance and things like that here. But Paul is also identifying with things in their culture and trying to communicate with them in a way they can understand, and starting with things they can agree on. And so he sees this altar to the unknown God. And so he said, well, let me tell you about the unknown God. And so he starts with something they have in common. He bridges a Jewish view of God with a Greek understanding of philosophy and openness to new ideas. He presents a God who cares for the world. And so, unlike the idols who are capricious and serve themselves and kind of laid by the pool, other people wave palm branches at them, he presents a God who cares for the world, who is transcendent, yet also intimately involved, who cares. We have lots of questions about that, don't we? We've addressed many times here a God who is very, very powerful, yet very painful things happen in our lives. But the view here, coming from this ancient Jewish faith, is that God is somehow powerful, but also intimately involved in life, and can actually feel emotion and suffer with us when we suffer. Not like the faraway gods of the Greek pantheon. Right? So they would have heard that. Seattle Pacific University scholar Robert Wall writes, in a sharply stated conclusion, Paul wonderfully captures the essence of the biblical conception of God, who was a once transcendent, yet personal, sovereign, and fully engaged in human life. All right, so Paul gives them an idea that is attractive to them in some ways, but he does it in a way that they have a hook to hang it on. They can see that they have some mutual benefit and some things in common. So, if you're a note taker, perhaps one thing we can take from this is it's okay to hold strong opinions. Just know why you hold them. You know, we tend to be down on what we're not up on. We tend to fill in the gaps when we don't understand something. At the same time, it's okay to hold strong opinions. Just know why you hold them. It's okay to know who you're going to vote for president and to feel strongly about that. You just want to know why. It's okay to have a belief about the Bible and the questions that a lot of people have. You just want to know why you have those beliefs, right? We can go through life with unexamined beliefs as well. And some of us are naturally very open people, and so we kind of feel the pressure to not really stand for anything. And to just kind of, I don't know, be kind of amoeba, you know, just kind of morphing wherever we are and just kind of trying to keep the peace and make Thanksgiving dinner peaceful, right? And we just feel like it's wrong to have any kind of conviction or to stand for something or to feel strongly about that. And that's not the case at all. You just want to know why. And so it's okay to have strong opinions. Just know why you hold them. And the discussion of those strong opinions can create new realities. It can move us forward as a society. And so it doesn't have to be lobbing verbal bombs, but new creative things, new exciting things, beautiful things can come out of the sharing of those opinions. You just want to know why you hold them. And a great way to know why you hold them is just to simply ask why. To practice critical thinking, which means to ask questions. Why do I believe that? Where did I come up with that? My freshman year at a small Christian college, I was in Philosophy 101. And the teacher said some things I was surprised they let him get away with it in this small Christian college, pleasantly surprised. Because he helped these little Christian kids to start thinking for themselves. And there was one rule in the class. You could say all kinds of things, you could share whatever idea you wanted, but as you shared it, you just had to be able to know why. And one day I remember there was this poor, unsuspecting kid who came, straight out of Sunday school somewhere, and gave this just strong, impassioned speech on probably something about, why the Bible's, literal and the world's 6,000 years old and this kind of stuff. And the professor pushed him a little bit, and the kid's answer was, well, that's just how I was raised. That's just how I was raised, And that just didn't fly. I remember the feeling of embarrassment. It's almost like heckling a comedian. You just don't do that. You know what I mean? You don't tell a philosopher, that's how I was raised. That's not the answer you give. Because that's the opposite of critical thinking and examining your own beliefs. And so it's okay to have a strong opinion. You just want to know why. And then lastly, you try to build a bridge. And in discussions with other people in our culture and social media and people who vote differently than you do and people in your family that believe in different things than you do, it's okay to have strong opinions. You just want to know why. But then you try to build a bridge. Again, Paul starts with this idol to the unknown God. And then he quotes a couple of Greek poets. In verse 28, he says, "For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring." The first quote's probably from a poem called Cretica by Epimenides, who lived 100 years BC, or several hundred years BC. And it's a hymn to the Greek god Zeus, who they believed at that time, in Zeus we live and move and have our being. And then Paul quotes a poem called Phenomena by one of the most respected poets of antiquity, Aratus. And I'm going to read a few lines from this poem, Phenomena. It's another hymn to Zeus, right? It's not the Jewish conception of God. It's not the Christian conception of God. It's a hymn to Zeus, all right? And the poem begins, and let us begin with Zeus, right? And so to most Greeks, Zeus was like the sky god who threw lightning bolts. But to the more educated, enlightened ones, they saw Zeus as kind of a force that permeated the universe. And so here's a few lines of phenomena. From Zeus begin, never let us leave. His name unloved. With him, with Zeus, are filled all paths we tread, and all the marts of men, filled too the sea and every creek and bay. And in all things we need the help of Zeus, for we too are his offspring. Paul quotes the poem, and he says, as your own poets have said, we are his offspring. And so he takes a poem about Zeus, and he doesn't slam Zeus, but he shares his idea of who God is and finds commonality, that in his mind we're God's offspring. Do you see what he does there? He's not saying you're wrong and stupid, Jimmy Kimmel. He's saying, wait, we share some things in common, and we have some similar ground we can stand on and start from as we walk together. We don't have to agree on everything, but we have some similar starting points. And he presents his own view, and when the talk is done, there's some sneering, but others said, let's hear more. The result was there was some peace, and there was some openness. In the last presidential election back in 2012, there was an article published called The Unconscious Reactions That Separate Liberals and Conservatives. And is that just an interesting title right there? And they did a study on the brains of liberals and conservatives. And they found, aren't you just like sitting on the edge of your seat, like what's this babbler saying right now? And so they found that the conservative and liberal brain, in this particular study at least, they work differently. They respond to stimuli differently. So I'll just read a couple of lines, and then we have something we're going to get to that's really important today. Blue state, red state, big government, big business, gay rights, fetal rights. The United States is driven by political extremes. To paraphrase humor columnist Dave Barry, Republicans think of Democrats as godless, unpatriotic, Volvo-driving, France-loving, elitist latte guzzlers, whereas Democrats dismiss Republicans as ignorant, NASCAR-obsessed, gun-fondling religious fanatics. An exaggeration for sure, but the reality is still pretty stark. Congress is in a perpetual stalemate because of the two parties' inability to find middle ground on practically anything. According to the experts who study political leanings, liberals and conservatives do not just see things differently, they are different in their personalities and even in their unconscious reactions to the world around them. They just showed pictures of like fearful situations. The conservative and liberal brains reacted differently to the photo. This amazing thing happened, though. They found out that both liberals and conservatives had strong reactions based on their moral values. They were just different moral values. So, for example, and this is simplifying, which is dangerous, but the conservative brain tended to value stability, structure, predictability, order. Right? The liberal brain valued, I was going to say openness, but yeah, openness, but also new things, welcoming, hospitality, right? Now, would you agree? Actually, all of those values are important. It's just that one brain emphasized some values more than the other, but they were all emphasizing their values. And the author of the article said his hope was that this study could help to cure some of the divide. Knowing that, yeah, we can see things differently, but it doesn't mean we're evil. It means we're making our judgments, we're making our decisions based on our moral criteria, but at least it's moral criteria. And that by listening to each other, we can actually benefit from that. So next week, we're starting a new sermon series called Shuffle, where we're looking at the parables of Jesus for 3 weeks. And then after that, September 4th, we're starting a series called Issues 2016. And we're going to talk about some of the more divisive issues of our time, and we're going to try to present both sides fairly. And then we'll, might share an opinion as humbly as possible, but we want to make sure that everybody feels we've been fair. We're going to talk about wealth inequality and immigration, abortion, LGBTQ rights versus religious liberty. And so that's where we're headed in September. And the point is not to say I'm right, you're wrong, but the point is try to represent both sides and see if we can kind of bring some people together in this discussion. What do you think? You think I'm crazy, don't you? Actually. So Okay. So one of the issues that is so divisive right now is the issue of, once again, of race, of ethnicity in our country. And as a white guy who grew up in rural Ohio, I was oblivious to this for most of my life. It's now in the media and, of course, top of mind, and we're seeing violence now. And we have the Black Lives Matter movement, which I sympathize with in many ways. It's a way of saying Black Lives Matter too. Black lives also matter. That's what folks in that movement are trying to say. And then now there's the reaction of Blue Lives Matter. I saw a car in Chandler the other day on my way to work that had a big sticker across the back window, Blue Lives Matter. And I thought to myself, if we're at the place in our country where we pit all of us in picking sides, if we pick African Americans versus cops, you guys, that is a tragedy for the United States of America. I mean, it's a major issue right now. And it's so indicative of this polarization. And so there are folks who say, well no, Black lives, it's not just Black lives, all lives matter. But then there's a negation of what the Black Lives Matter folks are trying to say. And then there's folks that say Blue Lives Matter, and then there's a negation of that, as though you can go shooting cops and have anarchy. No thanks. That's not the kind of society we want to live in. And so a couple of weeks ago, I talked to an officer in our church here in the back of the room after the Dallas shooting where the sniper killed several officers, and then there was the ambush in Baton Rouge where officers were killed. And I just asked her, how are you doing? And she said, it's pretty tense right now. We feel it. In the PD, we feel the gaze upon us, and you never know when somebody's going to react. And so I asked her if I could interview her at some point in the future, and she said, yeah, and she invited me on a ride-along up in Tempe. And so a couple of weeks ago, went on this ride-along, and she was kind enough to let me shoot some iPhone video while she was driving. And so I'm going to show this, I don't know, minute-and-a-half clip of Michelle before we bring Michelle up here in a minute. So let's watch.
And it's not about that at all. I mean, we've made it about that, but if you ask almost any police officer going out doing their job, they go out and they do the same job no matter what. No matter what's going on in their day, what happens in in the country, they're going to treat people the same way that they've been treating people, because that's what we do. 99% of police officers are good people, and they go out and they treat everybody the same way for the most part. I mean, there are some bad apples, but you're going to have that in any profession, no matter what. So I feel like it's definitely something that the media is making it bigger than it is, and people feed into it, unfortunately.
Michelle is an officer with the Tempe PD, and she was kind enough to let us talk for a minute. So come on up, Michelle. There you go. Thanks for doing it. So your shift was like 6 p.m. to 4 a.m.
Correct.
That night, and I think I left at 10. I left. I left like legitimately kind of worried about you that night. Because I thought, oh, this is real. It was an experience for me where I sat in on the briefing beforehand. You really appreciate you letting me do that. And as we went out, they talk about all these terrible things that have happened in Tempe. And they're like, okay, be safe, everybody. And you go get in the cruisers, and here you go, and anything can happen at any moment. And I had a sense of that. For the first time in my life, what kind of police officers face on a second-by-second basis. That was a realization for me. So what made you decide to be a police officer, and how is your job fulfilling to you? How's that?
Let's start with that.
Why not just jump in? Let's skip the small talk.
Should jump right in. All right. The reason I became a police officer is, well, it's in my family, first of all. Both my parents worked for Tempe Police. since I was born, and so I grew up in that culture and that mentality, in that community, and I love the way it felt. I love the way the community felt. I love the brotherhood, the sisterhood that came with it, and I also felt the need to serve my community. Service was a big part of our family, and I also have a lot of family that live in Tempe. I grew up in Tempe, and so I wanted to serve the members of the community the best I could, and I feel like me being a member of the community and growing up there and having so many family members, I could do that well, because I felt like everybody I contacted was my family member, was somebody that I cared about, that I could serve.
It's excellent. And so you became a cop wanting to serve the community, yes. and now we're in a very divisive time where, we have snipers now in buildings shooting cops. How does the current level of violence against police officers and that tension, how is that affecting the officers that you know? What effect does that have on you guys as you go out?
Well, we're definitely, I would say, more cognizant of what's going on, more of our surroundings. As we mentioned before, it's heavy, you feel it, but at the same time, we signed up to do a job, and we're going to go out every day and do our job no matter what, and you can't let things faze you, because you have to be in the right mindset 100% of the time. So it's in the back of your head, but you have to keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. When we went out in the cruiser, it kind of felt like we've got a target on the car. Like I felt that. Like we're driving around in a moving target.
Yeah.
And so you guys laughed because I left at 10 or whatever. Fine. But there was really that feeling that you guys seemed to be, and the officers I met in that briefing room, like you guys seem to be used to that. And I really felt that. Like I was looking around like, hey, what's, every second, I mean, you could pull somebody over for speeding, and then a second later, like something happens that could be on the national news. That's just the everyday reality,
right,
aside from this extra tension that you guys are feeling.
Right, but if you think about it, this is everyday attention. This has been going on for as long as I've been a cop. Tensions between communities, tensions, people, a lot of people don't like cops. I understand, but so we've become used to it. Yes, we know there's a target on our backs.
Yeah,
you just have to plug away.
Yeah, you. I'll get to the canned question here in a second, but there was this thing that you did that I thought was really impressive. We pulled somebody over who didn't have her lights on, right? Okay, and it was like a scared teenage girl or somebody. And so you went easy on her, and we were at the parking lot of a gas station, and you saw a gentleman over in front of the gas station, and then you went over to talk to him, and he was a homeless man, I'm guessing, and a man of a different ethnicity than you and I, and you engaged in a conversation with him, and it wasn't, well, it was obvious from the conversation that you knew him, he knew you, and he knew that you know all of his friends, and you guys have been having conversations like this for a really long time, checking up on him, asking him how he's doing, if he's too hot, if he has enough to drink, if he has enough to eat. And you showed concern for him and his friends. They were like, I felt like the third wheel, they're like chatting about how everybody's friends are doing around town. And then you bought him some food and something to drink. I know I'm totally embarrassing you right now. But I didn't expect a cop to do that. And I just thought that was really impressive. And it wasn't just something for me, because you and he have been doing this for a long time, and everybody knew it. And so what does good policing look like? And how can we, in this current environment, how can we make sure that we feel justice is being done to everybody in the United States and also support good cops? What does good policing look like, and how can we support good cops? Did you get all that?
Good policing, caring, fairness. I think that's the most that anybody, being a good human, treating people as humans. I think that's the most that we could ask for as police officers, as humans, like I said, treating friends, treating each other fairly, and showing love. Being a good Christian.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever that means.
Yeah.
But showing love and compassion and fairness. And then, what was the second part of that?
How can we support good cops?
We don't expect it. So as long as you don't scream at us, that's fantastic. You'd be surprised. We get screamed at a lot. Just a simple thank you is very supportive, and showing others that you care and support them. And I think that's the best thing we can do for each other.
Nice. After the ride along with you, and especially, I mean, your interaction with everybody, troublemakers or not, but especially that conversation that you had with that gentleman, that was it was obvious that you have roots in that community, like you said, and that you've cared about people for a long time. I just thought you can't be a better cop than that. Cops you just can't do a better job than what you did of loving your community and showing care the way that you did. So thank you for that. Thanks for that privilege. And thanks for sharing with us. Can we thank Michelle? So you see that kind of an attitude of compassion and of fairness. And it'd be nice to see more of that in our society, right? Display a sense of openness to the other person, the needs of the other person. New ideas, not creating false dichotomies that just rip our country apart, but supporting justice for all people, absolutely, and especially those who haven't received it, absolutely. And then also bringing good people together, letting good people come to the middle and be able to say things like, I don't know, and I've never really thought about it that way before, or I'm not sure, but, or at least we can agree on these things, right? Or let's find a way to work together, or let's meet in the middle. Being open means not reading into what we don't know, knowing that we're down on what we're not up on, so being humble. Holding strong opinions is fine, but we know why we hold them. We examine our beliefs, and we try to build a bridge.